but also he is here because of me. As many of you know, I go to France periodically, and David is who I go visit there, along with his lab. And so David is currently a professor of ethology at the University of, well, you could say like three different things. The University of Jean Monnet in Saint Etienne,
Yeah.
University of Lyon in Saint Etienne,
That covers
University
it,
of Saint Etienne
in Lyon. Yeah.
in Lyon,
Yeah.
but it's not Lyon.
Yeah. Nobody knows. But we're definitely in Saint
I don't know.
Yeah.
I have a line in my CV because I was a visiting professor there once, and I just took a stab.
Yeah.
But it's the Ennis Lab, which is basically the sensory and neuroethology team, I think is the translation.
Yeah. We really have we now call the bioacoustics research lab. We
Oh,
have
there
a
you go. I
problem
like
with
that a lot.
naming ourselves.
Bioacoustics research. It's really one of the centers in the world of bioacoustics. Really interesting set of researchers there. And David got his PhD in behavioral biology in Toulouse, and that's another complicated research organization in France, the URSA.
INRA.
INHA, right,
INRA.
but then now they've changed the name a little bit.
Yeah.
I can't keep track of any of that.
Yeah.
But so yeah, David is a behavioral biologist who did his early work on deer, and then now he works a lot with humans and studying human voices. And we have a few projects. We haven't really quite figured out what we're going to do together, but we have papers anyway. So yeah, so it's my pleasure to welcome David, and yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Greg. Thanks for the invitation. It's a very prestigious place to be. One thing that you didn't mention is I spent 20 years at Sussex University after I worked on did my PhD on deer. And when you land in a school of psychology and you work on deer roaring, people look at you like, oh, what the hell, you know? Yeah, this is, bad way to spend taxpayers' money. That's what on most people's mind. So I suppose, but I learned a lot from being in the School of Psychology, and I've been basically going back and forth between animals and humans all my life. And I think, the alternance has been really useful, and that's what I'm going to try to convince you. So I was going to start the talk by saying that deer can talk, since it's the 1st of April, but that was not going to fly. So I'm going to tell you, what we can learn, from studying them. What we can learn about our voice and our vocal apparatus and how it evolved, how we use it, and the different components of our voice. But also maybe a little bit at the end about speech. Not just the voice, but also not just how we sound, but what we say. And the idea behind the whole talk is that sexual selection, and especially selection for the communication and the exaggeration of body size, has been a very important factor in shaping our vocal apparatus, in shaping how we use our voice, and maybe even in shaping how we speak. So to show you the effect that sexual selection has on the voice, I need to take you on a tour of the world, where I'm going to show you what I call bioacoustics or vocal biodiversity. We talk about genetic diversity, but the behavior within the group. All the animals I'm going to play, they are polygynous deer, so they're from the same family, same group, and they basically most of them can hybridize and produce fertile offspring. So they even challenge, though they're different species, they challenge the concept of species a little bit. And I'm going to start with the red deer recorded here in Scotland. Can you hear it well, everybody? Okay. So this sounds like a cow. It's not, people get really excited about listening to red deer roars. I don't, not anymore anyway. This is the Spanish version. A little, higher pitched. This is a tiny one. This is the Corsican deer. It's a case of island dwarfism, so it's really a really small deer, but it sounds really big, as you could hear, quite scary. This is apologies if you're eating right now, but this is the fallow deer, and these are groans. So they come from Mesopotamia, but they're quite common. They're found in most parks around the world, around castles. This one here, this is the Barasinga in Indian deer, and you could see there's something about telling you how much lung capacity. You know, it goes all the way until there is absolutely nothing left in the lungs. This is the Per David's deer. That's almost went extinct last century, but was saved by Per David, who's a monk, hence the name. This is the Timor deer. This is the Japanese Sika deer. This is the Timor. The one I played before was the Taiwanese deer. Anyway, so you get a sense of the variability, and now we got to end up around here, and I'm sure you're familiar with the elk or wapiti call. And this one is quite interesting because it biphonates basically. It produces the roar with vocal fold vibration, so you can, if you pay attention, you can hear the cow-like red deer, and on top of it you can hear a whistle, which we think is produced as an aerodynamic whistle in the nostrils. So that's a lot of variability, a lot of complexity that we need tools to study. And what we've been using, applying in my lab to study these signals is what we call it sounds great when you apply for funding, an integrative, multi-level approach to animal vocal signals. And we combine 3 levels of investigation, anatomical investigation. The idea behind all the work that we do on deer is that a lot of people study animal vocalizations without studying how they're produced. And it's a little bit like, you could do a study on cars and how they sound, but if you never lifted the bonnet, you would not really know why they sound different. So, and that would be really, really silly. So the idea here is really to look at how the sounds are produced, and I'll get back to this later. That allows us to, we can make biometric investigation, look at how the different components of the vocal apparatus co-vary with age, sex, body size, etc., temperament, and then make predictions about how the acoustics are going to reflect these covariations. Then we can test these predictions by doing acoustic analysis if we record animals of non-age, non-sex, non-body size, dominance level, etc. And then we can make predictions about what information is encoded and what is going to matter to the animal. We use then resynthesis, so we modify the parameters of interest in the sound along size variation, along sex variation, along age variation, and we play it back to the animals, and we look in playback experiment, we look at their behavioral responses. In fact, when I wrote this talk, I mentioned resynthesis, and now we've managed to get tools that allow us to synthesize from scratch. So we can play back sounds to animal which are pure mathematical equations that where we control all the parameters, which is becoming really really handy for testing complex hypotheses. So the methodological framework that we use for trying to understand how these sounds are produced and how these production mechanisms are reflected in the acoustic structure is the source filter theory of voice production that was coined initially to explain how speech, how the human voice is produced, and which can be generalized to most vertebrate, even birds. Birds use their syrinx, they don't use their larynx, but they still have basically a source and a filter, an oscillator and a filter. And a resonance chamber, sorry. So according to the source filter theory of voice production, as air is forced out of the lungs through the glottis being the space between the vocal folds, it sets the vocal folds into vibration, which generates a glottal wave, which is going to be composed of a fundamental frequency and a series of harmonics. And the fundamental frequency, FO or F0, is determined mainly by the length of the vocal folds. So If you behead a deer just above the larynx and the deer still makes a roar, it will sound like this. So not very pretty, but you get a sense of vibration. Something's vibrating. It's not a pure tone. It doesn't sound like a beep, or it has some quality. And it keeps going on. And but then this signal in the second stage is filtered in the supralaryngeal cavities, that the cavities which are above the larynx, so that's the pharynx, the oral cavity and the nasal cavity. These cavities have their own resonant properties, and this is going to shape the envelope of the glottal wave, which is going to create these broadband frequency peaks, which you can see over here. So rather than uniformly decreasing with frequency, now you have heterogeneity of the distribution of the energy across the harmonics. And these broadbands are called the formants, and they are mostly determined by the length of the vocal tract that vocalizes, or the animal that vocalizes, or also by the shape of the vocal tract. So if I play you the result, okay, so if you synthesize this and then put it through the filter of a red deer vocal tract, you get the red deer, something that sounds, pretty much like a red deer roar. And a key assumption of the source filter theory that is so far, I found is verified in all the animals that I've studied is that the source is independent of the filter. So there's no feedback of the filter on the behavior of the source, meaning that both can encode information independently of one another. So we can have information about body size, about motivation, about age, about level of testosterone, anything, both encoded at the level of the vocal folds in the fundamental frequency and at the level of the filter in the formant frequencies. So as I explained, understanding how these features are produced can lead to informed predictions about the information that they contain, and therefore, the information animals are likely to use in their communication. Very quickly, I'm sure you all know about this, but deer are polygynous, so one male is going to mate with many females. The males only pass their genes to the offspring. There is no parental care whatsoever. Males can improve their reproductive success by mating with as many females as possible, and a female are expected to be choosy. And in this context, also size is important. Being a large stag gives you a huge advantage in terms of fighting, and having large sons also will mean that your sons are more likely to survive and spread your genes. So males are going to use these signals, the roars, in order to broadcast information about body size, but not just broadcast information in order to maybe avoid fighting or to seduce mating partners, but also to exaggerate, the impression of body size conveyed. So there are two candidates for size communication. The first one is the fundamental frequency. As I said, it's inversely related to the length of the vocal fold. So if you have longer vocal folds, you will have a lower fundamental frequency. And formant frequencies also are inversely, or the spacing, individual formant frequency, but also the spacing between consecutive formants is inversely related to the length of the vocal tract. So an animal that has a longer vocal tract, a longer pharyngeal, oral, and nasal cavity will have lower resonances than an animal that has a shorter vocal tract. And the idea that for animals that are listening to roars, the information about body size could be potentially encoded both in the fundamental frequency or in the length of the vocal tract. We could also add the duration. Think about that guy that went on and on and on until he had no air left. That could also be an index of lung capacity and therefore size. So we looked at the interspecific covariation between size and pitch. Pitch being the perceptual correlate of F0, of the vocal fold vibration rate. And what you find is a fairly tight correlation, but with interesting outliers. Some animals have much higher fundamental frequencies than you'd expect for the size of the species, and others much lower than you would expect for their body size. And the first one, again, is the American elk. Because these high frequency that you hear is produced as a whistle, it's decorrelated from the length of the vocal folds. They actually have very long vocal folds, and when you hear the vocal fold vibration, the cow-like part, then they go back to the on the regression line. Same for the horses. This is another huge animal that has a very, very high-pitched voice, but we think that this is an aerodynamic whistle, which is created at what is called the intra-arytenoid portion of the glottis. So I won't go into details, but we study these guys. We have larynges that we put in heliox, and we see whether when we change the density of the atmosphere, whether the pitch goes up, which you expect if it's a whistle, but not if it's vocal fold vibration. Some animals have evolved incredible adaptation to sound very, very big. This is a koala. It goes on and on and on. And towards the end, it's actually quite ridiculous. So you might want to rethink having one at home, right? But not a male anyway. So what these guys actually have vocalizations which are very high pitched, and then they produce these other vocalizations which are very, very low pitched. And what we found when we studied their anatomy was that they've evolved a secondary set of vocal folds at the level of the velum. So where what he does basically is the same as snoring, basically. So, but except that they really have a differentiation of the tissue that has changed in terms of structure. So if you look at the soft palate of the koala, they really have a secondary set of vocal folds. We call them velar vocal folds, and they're very, very long for enabling this really tiny animal to produce these very low fundamental frequencies. This is the fallow deer that I played before, and you can see it has a huge Adam's apple, also some very. Oops. Should work, hopefully. Yeah. So the larynx of a fallow deer is very very floppy. It's very soft, all cartilaginous, and it's huge, and it's got huge vocal folds that vibrate very, very low fundamental frequency. Another one. Well, I've heard howler monkeys. Yeah. You can see the behavior of rounding the lips also to lengthen the vocal tract. Okay, I won't play the full thing. It goes on and on and on. But these guys also have a huge larynx, disproportionately large larynx that hosts disproportionately large vocal folds. And there are cases, this is really a case where we see convergent evolution with males from several species. Sometimes, for example, the sika deer, which hybridized with the red deer, has a tiny little larynx that is stuck at the top of the throat. So very short vocal folds. The male vocal folds do not increase when they go through puberty. Whereas next to it you have the fallow deer, for example, that has huge vocal folds. And we see these adaptations for developing very long vocal folds that enable the production of very low pitch vocalizations in many that has appeared independently in many groups. I mean, these hammerhead bats some people call them flying larynges, because 70% of the body of the animal when it's flying is basically the larynx. So to study the function of the fundamental frequency in these vocalizations, and I'll stick to the example of red deer rose, we use solar resynthesis. So we can modify the fundamental frequency of the rolls independently of everything else. So the duration, the prosody, the intonation, nothing changes, but the pitch changes. And just to give you an impression of the effect of doing that. So you had a medium pitch, a high pitch, and a low pitch roll. And we can play this back to animals, and I'll go quickly over these. But basically what we found is that males don't pay attention to the pitch. So it doesn't affect them. It affects the variability of their response, but not the level of their response, the aggressive response. What we do is we put a speaker next to the harem, so we mimic an intrusion of a challenger in the harem, and we monitor the response. Typically, they're going to trash the vegetation with their antlers. They will roll back, and sometimes they will charge the speaker.
You guys chose a male that were completely separate from them. There's no familiarity.
Yeah. These males are strangers.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. That's it's the intrusion of a new, because otherwise they would think like, what happened? You just became big or you just became small.
Right.
If they have individual recognition, which they probably do. These guys, this is not research that I conducted. This is conducted by Alan McElligot's group. And the fallow deer, and remember the fallow deer have these big larynx, very low pitch groans. In this case, males tend to find low pitch groans more threatening, so they are more shy, when they're exposed to these groans. So it suggests that the fundamental frequency in this species that has evolved this huge larynx, this very, very low pitch pulse vocalization is important in male-male competition. In red deer, we found that female, I don't have time to play this video, but we put the female, we make sure she's in estrus, and we put her in a Y maze, and we expose them to rolls with different fundamental frequency, and we found that they preferred the high pitch rolls, which was a real surprise. And then much later, we realized that when you control for body size, actually male red deer, even though they have low pitch vocalization, they're higher pitched than expected for the body size, which says that in these species, you'll see that sounding big is important, but having a high pitch will probably make animals sound more active, maybe have a higher lung capacity. We're not entirely sure. Makes them sound sexier. Oops, sorry. So just to conclude on F0 and size, F0 broadly covaries with body size at interspecific level. It also reflects size differences between sex and age classes. I didn't mention this, but obviously kids are always higher pitched than females when they are smaller, and higher pitched than males. However, F0 generally, in all the research that I'm aware of, including in humans, is a poor indicator of inter-individual differences in body size in same-sex adults. So in red deer, there is no relationship between the size of the animal and the pitch of the rolls, for example. So in the species that have evolved a very low fundamental frequency, like the fallow deer, F0 may be an indicator of dominance, possibly mediated by the effect of androgens on laryngeal growth, whereas in high F0 species, F0 may correlate with other fitness traits, for example, stamina or strength mediated by subglottal pressure. The idea that if you're stronger, you can build up a higher subglottal pressure and therefore produce rolls with a higher pitch. Now I'm going to switch to the filter and formant frequency. So if you model the animal's vocal tract as a quarter wavelength resonator, as I mentioned earlier on, you have this inverse relationship between the spacing between consecutive formants and the length of the vocal tract of the animal that vocalizes. This means that if you know the vocal tract of a length of an animal, you know where to look for formants, or if you measure formants in a vocalization of an animal that you recorded at night, for example, that you cannot see, you should be able to estimate the length, their body size. And it works if we compare a species. I probably don't have time to spend too much time on deer, but across species, the formant frequency spacing is inversely related with the mass, the body mass of the animal. And here, what we have is three regression lines. One, the bottom one being the one with adaptations to sound bigger. So, which is what I'm going to discuss now. When I was doing my PhD, I noticed this Adam's apple in the neck of the deer, and you can see that when the deer vocalizes, it moves the larynx down towards the sternum. And the effect of this on the formants is to lower the formants until they reach this plateau, which corresponds to the full length of the animal's neck. So what we wrote at the time is that this was an adaptation to sound bigger, to basically lower formants to give an impression of body size that is bigger than the one predicted for the size of the animal. And we observed the same thing in fallow deer groans. These very low pulse vocalization are very nicely defined formants, and again the formants drop at the beginning as the animal lower the vocal tract. And if you estimate the length of the vocal tract of a red deer or a fallow deer, you get around 70 centimeters, which is much bigger than the size of the skull. So it means that the larynx is descended. It's not just in between the jaws like it would be in sheep or dogs, for example, but they also lower it when they vocalize. So we've done some CT scans on specimens, and what we found is that there is and dissection. There is basically an adaptation. This is the larynx in the resting position, the onset of vocalization, and this is when the larynx is completely descended. And here you see the hyoid apparatus, and the difference between these animals and most other mammals is that there is a very long, very extensible thyrohyoid ligament and very strong strap muscles that tie the larynx to the sternum, so it allows them to pull the larynx down when they vocalize, and you can see the effect on the vocal tract on these slices. So this is the resting position with the oral cavity, the nasal cavity, and here they have this very long pharyngeal cavity, actually two cavities, the nasopharynx and the oropharynx, that occur because of this extension of the vocal tract. In humans, the soft palate here, the velum, stops here. These guys, it goes all the way down. So when the larynx is fully lowered, there is contact between the epiglottis, which is the lid that shuts the airways when we swallow, and the velum. So we don't have that, which is why we have a descended larynx, but we don't have a separation, which may explain why we're more prone to choking when we try to eat and breathe at the same time. We made the hypothesis that when the larynx is fully descended in these guys, then it should inversely correlate with the length of the neck of the animal, and if the length of the neck of the animal correlates with body size, then the minimum formant frequency spacing should be an index of body size, which we found with these animals that had been darted on the Isle of Rum and for which we have a body weight. Again, we use solar. So this time, I'm not changing the pitch. I mean, it's affecting the pitch, but I'm not changing the fundamental frequency. I'm changing the formant frequency spacing. So, and I raised it by, so you can see the fundamental frequency, the harmonics are in the same position, but the resonances are moved up. So that would be a 30% smaller guy, or a smaller guy and a 30% bigger guy. I'll play it again just so you get a sense. So the middle one is a little bit like a Donald Duck. I don't know what's going on. Donald Duck version of a red deer. A little bit as if you breathe helium, or if you speak with a really, really short vocal tract. Like this, yeah.
But the pitch is, in theory, it's supposed to be.
Yeah, but it shows. It's the same, but it shows that moving formants affect the perceived pitch. Because people will tell you the one that has the higher, brightest timbra, whatever you will use, sounds higher pitch. Yeah. Anyway, so when we played these rolls back, we found that they did play. These red deer stag on Rum, the Isle of Rum, they would be much more aggressive in response in their responses to the rolls where the formants were really low. And also they extended the larynx by a further 2 centimeters when we played the large guys. So they thought, oh, this guy is large, I better give my full impression. So usually to do this, they round the lips, they fully extend the necks, and you can see the larynx is fully extended. Sometimes it's ever descended before the vocalization to hide the descent at the beginning. And I'll go quickly on this, but we found that females preferred, in this Y paradigm, maize paradigm, that we found that they preferred the roles that were broadcasting a lower performance. Do I have time to show a video? Yeah? Okay. So, because it's quite, I think, basically we play the roles, and just to give you an idea of the type of response we get, she chooses the gate, and she will go straight against this fence here that you can see here, and the speaker, which is blasting rolls at 103 decibel, is just behind that. And what they would do often is lick the fence and urinate to show to the potential male that they were in estrus. So, some people have questioned, sometimes the animal looks and you say, oh, mate choice, she preferred. No, in these studies, when we said she chose a male, it meant she had the choice between two speakers and she went to one and she displayed, these hinds, they hate males outside of the rut. The males are harassing them. They're just like pushing them away. They try to go to somewhere else. They herd them back into the harem. So it's really interesting that there's this 48-hour window where they will go for the male to get mated, to get copulation. And just like for in large larynges, animals with extended vocal tracts have convergently evolved. The koala, the king of size exaggeration, the muscles that link the larynx to the sternum have migrated inside the chest cavity, so they can pull the larynx inside the chest cavity. We can't do this. I can lower it a little bit, maybe till here, but I can't go further down. These guys, the muscles, the attachment of the muscles is migrating.
You lost your mic even.
Sorry?
Your mic.
Well, again, yes. It's not really tight, and my shirt is very... All right. And yeah, I just played this one from to say that sometimes the results are you make what you want of it anyway. One thing that we found, and which I think is particularly interesting, is that males of more sexually dimorphic species produce sexual calls with more disproportionately low performance. So the males of the species which are highly sexually dimorphic, where the male is much bigger than the female, suggesting that size is important for males and large size is selected for, they produce calls with adaptations that allow them to sound even bigger than those which are less sexually dimorphic, which to me is a clear indication that in these species there is sexual selection for size exaggeration and for anatomical or behavioral adaptations to support this. So really quickly to conclude, form and spacing encodes body size at interspecific level, which is not that interesting. Form and spacing reflect size differences between sex and age classes, as for pitch. But form and spacing is also a reliable, generally indicator of body size within sex and age classes. So, and the idea here is that on the vocal tract, probably there are more stringent anatomical constraints to enforce the relationship between size and frequency than at the level of the larynx, where the vocal folds are not really limited in the, if the larynx grows bigger at puberty, for example, or every rat for a red deer, then this could be decorrelated from body size. Whereas the vocal tract, unless you start creating loops like some birds have with the trachea, then you cannot really decorrelate the length of the vocal tract ultimately from body size. So, males of several species have developed an adaptation that allow them to cheat on their body size, but the signals often end up remaining honest because of further anatomical constraints. So what about us in all this? This is where I'm talking for the psychologist suddenly. What do these behaviors tell us about our voice and, as I said, also about speech? Now, there are obvious parallels between postures in humans. We tend to round our lips to sound more dominant, or spread our arms as much as possible to look as big as possible. You can see the amount of lip spreading in this haka performance. First, we have an Adam's apple, like the red deer. I mean, 20 years ago, I would say red deer and fallow deer have an Adam's apple like humans, but in fact, we have an Adam's apple, and it's often been the fact that the larynx is descended in humans is also often been presented as an adaptation for speech, maybe a pre-adaptation, but here, clearly, with the deer, we have a species that has nothing interesting to say. I mean, I've studied deer for 20 years. It's just like, I'm big, I want to mate. I'm big, I want to mate. There's nothing else. But they have a descended larynx. So if you find a descended larynx in Neanderthal, you cannot say they that evolved for speech. That's one lesson that certainly we learned from discovering this descended larynx in red deer. And we are also sexually dimorphic. There is sexual dimorphism of the human voice. Basically, the larynx is larger in males, so we have an Adam's apple that is not present in most women, and it's also slightly more descended. At puberty, the larynx descends a little further, which does not improve, the eloquence of human male adolescents, so it has nothing to do with speech intelligibility, as you can hear. And so just to, using resynthesis, if we take an adult woman voice.
A cat chased a rabbit down the path.
Okay, and we lower the resonances to shorten the vocal tract. We raise to lengthen the vocal tract, sorry.
A cat chased a rabbit
then
down
we have,
the path.
this interesting voice, which has a female pitch, but a male vocal tract. And then if we lower the pitch to...
A cat chased a rabbit
then
down
we get
the
a
path.
male voice. Obviously I cheated, I resynthesized the other way around. The male voice is natural and the female was resynthesized. So how did these differences develop? Well, the vocal tract of the human baby is short and there are no differences between boys and girls. The larynx is not descended. They don't really have a pharyngeal cavity, which allows babies to simultaneously suckle and breathe. And we studied babies' cries, and we found that there is huge variation in the pitch of the cries. Some babies cry with a very high pitch, around 500 hertz, and others with a rather relatively low pitch, 300 hertz. And if I ask you, for example, which of the two is a boy or a girl? So which one is a girl, A or B? B? Yeah, it's the other way around, obviously. There is no sex differences, basically. But adults, when we ask people to guess the sex of a baby, we get it slightly higher that chance. So there is something probably in the prosody, in the rhythm, but we haven't found a way to isolate what it is. There is a paper that claims that German babies vocalize cry differently from French babies, for example. So there may be something that is learned that is reinforced differently across culture. We don't really know. So, but certainly in terms of the pitch of the cry, there is absolutely no difference. You can see the spread of boys they go from one extreme to the other of the spectrum. Interestingly, when you ask adult listeners, is it a boy or a girl, you can predict what they're going to say depending on the pitch of the baby. So we apply stereotypes, I suppose, that we build by listening to the difference in adult voices to babies. And we are even to the point that we think that high-pitched little boys are feminine, or low-pitched little girls as 3 months old is a feminine little boy or masculine little girl, etc. So there is something really deeply ingrained in the way we apply stereotypes in pitch to everything, and we actually often get it really wrong, even judging size in adult humans. If you listen to a very low pitch voice, you will say, "Oh, this got to be a really tall guy," and some of the time it's absolutely not a tall person at all. Then as we grow up until puberty, we should have the same voice, but we don't. You know, the little boys and little girls speak differently. If you speak to a prepubertal child on the phone, most of the time you'll know if it's a boy or a girl. So
look at the wall of the spooky old castle.
Look at the wall of the spooky castle.
okay, so you know it's obvious which one is the boy, which one is the girl, and there are these differences are quite important. And most of the time we get the gender of the child right. Now, if we modify the pitch, if the boys and girls have exactly the same pitch, even in most studies, the pitch of boys is 1 hertz higher. It's not significant, it means nothing, but often it's on average higher than the pitch of girls. But they have different form and frequencies, and if you change the form and frequency spacing along a continuum, then you will see this really neat sigmoid curve where people say boy, 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 girl, 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 or girl, 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 boy, boy, boy. And
Look.
Sorry, what we found is that, I didn't discover that. That was in a paper by Sachs and Lieberman, but they really never provided data to support this observation, is that boys speak with more rounded lips. So if you're a boy, you're expected to sound a little bit more concerned, and you speak more with rounded lips, whereas if you're a little girl, you have to speak more with a smile. And this is how you perform basically in a way your gender. So gender expression in kids has a very strong behavioral basis. And what is amazing is if you ask a little boy to sound like a little girl, immediately they speak with a smile. If you ask a girl to sound like a little boy, she will round her lips, and sometimes she do something with frown a little bit like that. So it's and basically, just to illustrate this point,
A cat chased a rabbit down the path.
if I raise the resonances by 15%,
A cat chased a rabbit down the path.
I think this, the voice sounds perfectly natural. But immediately we switch from a boy to girl, even though they have the same vocal tract length at that age. There's there's minor differences, but that are not really audible. And we've done plenty of studies on this where it's quite fascinating because we discovered we could ask. Well, first, if you play kids, voices with different, you feminize or masculinize the voice alone, they will say, oh, she will make a lousy engineer. She will be a really good nurse. So the more feminine voices are, so you can look at really occupational stereotypes. You can also ask kids to speak like a nurse or to speak like a mechanic and measure what they do. And you can use the variation in the fundamental frequency that they apply to get an index of how stereotypical the view of which is a really implicit way to get to the stereotype. Then you can maybe do an intervention and repeat the recording several months later and see whether the difference when they do one or the other has been attenuated or not. So the dimorphism in vocal anatomy appears at puberty. The larynx descends further in boys under the effect of testosterone, and the pitch roughly drops by half. As a consequence of a vocal fold lengthening, and the timbre also lowers disproportionately. So this is how we get to adult differences. I won't spend much time on this, but where do these differences come from? Well, the idea is that this dimorphism appears to also arise from sexual selection, and as in red deer and fallow deer. We are, I'm not a specialist of that, but I think considered to be a mildly sexually dimorphic species, or certainly to have a polygynous past. And there is this study that there's quite a few since which yielded interesting results. But in this study, men who had on Hadza hunter-gatherers, men who had deeper voices were perceived as more dominant, and they tended to have a greater reproductive success, more children in better health than men with higher pitch voices. So suggesting that there is some sort of sexual selection for a low pitch in these tribes. So the point that I want to make is really that sexual selection by, certainly in humans, creating like a male voice, which has low pitch, low frequency, low pitch, low resonances, and a female voice, which is high pitch, high resonances has kind of opened up, the acoustic space. If we all had the same, male and females had the same pitch, the same resonances, maybe we wouldn't play along this continuum as we do. And the idea here is that high-pitched voices, generally they're going to sound female, maternal, feminine, harmless, kind, sexy if you're a female, conciliatory, subordinate, etc. Whereas lower-pitched voices generally, and there's plenty of studies showing that's the case, sound more competent, more masculine, more male, you're a better leader, especially in times of war, you're more dangerous, you're more dominant, you're more aggressive, etc. And we play with that all the time. If you negotiate something you don't think you're really entitled, or when on the phone you get, hello, yes, I think maybe I might have the right to. If you're entitled, oh no, I'm sure, I better get this, or I'm going to be really angry. We change the pitch of our voices when we to express, emotions, to express motivation along this continuum. With a big problem for women, which is to sound sexy, you have to sound high pitch most of the time. This is caricatural, but if you sound high pitch and too high pitch, then you're not going to sound competent, and you're not going to sound assertive. You're not going to sound like someone would trust to invest their money, etc., etc. A good leader, blah blah blah. So there's kind of a complicated trade-off here that I think people need to be aware of, that you can be very high pitch and have a very sexy voice if people consider high pitch sexy, but still be a very good, very competent leader, for example. So yes, and kids develop, this ability to play along this continuum, which I think could be, this opening of these dimensions along this continuum. It may be at the basis, at least partly, of vocal control. So if you're stuck in a position, there is no place to go. But if you have the possibility to move along and continue to express something, where there are primary associations that then can become conventionalized or ritualized, then vocal control becomes more important. If you can change your voice in order to express emotions or motivation, then that might be something that have contributed to our ability to control volitionally change our voices. So that was about the voice. Now I'm going to talk briefly about speech. As I said, we've found a descended larynx in a species that lacks speech. Deer, when they produce their roar, they scale the formants. They scale all the formants uniformly to exaggerate their body size. And size, we've seen, is important, or certainly formant variation related to body size is perceived by deer because it affects the response of males and females. And one possibility is that this size exaggeration, this ability to judge size from a vocal tract resonances, could be a precursor of what we call vocal tract normalization. That is the idea that in order, for example, if a child says an E or an adult says E, the formants are in very different places. What is important is to extract the relative position of the formant frequencies to perceive an E. So to do that, we need to first assess the size of the vocalizer and basically to do what is called vocal tract normalization. And the pre-adaptation for this ability might be in size assessment through formant frequencies in animals. But the last point I want to make and just to present the results of a recent study is to see the idea was, the question was, is could size exaggeration also be at the origin of vowels? And just briefly, this is the same slide as for the red deer roar, but this time for speech production. If a beheaded speaker would sound like this, then you put my vocal tract, but I'm dead, the head back on my neck, and this is the voice with a neutral vocal tract. So I have vocal tract resonances. You can see the formants appearing here. But when we speak,
Hi there. How are you doing today?
Okay, then you can see you can hear obviously the phonemes, but you can see that the formants, what changed from here to there is articulation. We changed the shape of our vocal tract, which creates, this dance of the formants here, which encodes the different vowels and consonants. just to illustrate articulation in the MRI.
This is a video of speech in the MRI scanner. Images are recorded at 10 frames per second.
So basically, you can see the movements of the larynx up and down, the movements of the velum, and the complex movement of the tongue and of the lips as the speaker is producing all these different sounds. So in body size exaggeration, the scaling is uniform. Basically, when a red deer lowers its formants, it doesn't really change the length and the vocal tract. It doesn't really change the relative position of the formants. They're high at the beginning and low at the end. And if you ask me to produce a large oo, as in oo, and a small oo, as in oo, you know, the formant contrast will be the same. It's just their absolute position in the spectrum that will vary. So basically, the problem with the red deer is they stuck in they don't change the shape of the vocal tract. They only change the length of the vocal tract. And in this configuration, the formants are harmonically related. They only have 1 degree of freedom. If formant 1 goes down, formant 2 goes down 2, and 3, etc., etc. And this is not a useful way to encode information. In fact, in speech, you know what we encode information by creating contrast by shifting the relative position of formants, a little bit more like a barcode, except the analogy is not quite right. You have to ignore the bandwidth, the width of the bars, but the position of the bars. And here in this configuration, you have many more degrees of freedom. You can create many more shapes to encode much more complex information. So how did we get there? You know, how did we go from, if we think about size exaggeration, maybe our ancestors just lowered the larynx and rounded the lips to sound big, or raised the larynx and spread the lips to sound small. But that's kind of energy consuming. So the idea that we put forward is that maybe you can do shape changes that are going to just lower some formants, and that will have the same effect as lowering all the formants. And basically, this is what we do when we do E or OO. Okay, but we had to test this hypothesis that if an animal was to do something that sounds like an E or sound like a OO, that they would sound smaller when they produce an E, or E-like formant contrast, or larger when they produce a OO-like formant pattern. So to do this, won't spend too much time, but we created stimuli with various vocal tract length, and then so to correspond to a deer or a bison or a large mammal or a human range vocal tract. And then we shifted all the formants up or down, or just one formant, just F2, just F3, just to give you an idea. If we shift down, change down or up, F2 and F3, so what you have here is just F2 and F3, or all the formants shifted. And you can basically, to summarize the results, what we found is that just shifting 1 or 2 formants has pretty much the same effect on the size assessment as shifting all the formants. Which the idea we put forward is that maybe, you know, articulating the first vowels was a way to sound big or small without changing all the length of the vocal tract. So we call it like lazy vocal tract exaggeration. And the interesting, well, then what you can flip the question on its sorry, I'm missing some English here, but anyway, you understand what I mean. Maybe then the detection of cheaters. So if you have if you want to detect whether this is a big or large animal, or whether it's actually this animal producing an E or producing a U, then you have to be capable of detecting the shape of the vocal tract. And that could be a pre-adaptation for perceiving vowels. Yeah. Does it make sense? Yeah, cool. So this is what I was saying, so I can skip all these. And yes, the one interesting information is obviously that this correspondence in sound symbolic words, where you have lots more E sounding vowels in words that depict small things like tiny, mini, pretty, small armless things, whereas you get way more back vowels in words that depict large figures. In a way, this could be living fossils of this. This is very speculative, but I like speculating. So to conclude, deer cannot talk, but I hope I convince you that studying them can definitely help us understanding the origin of our voice. Gives us a different perspective than just doing research on humans only. And sexual selection for size communication and size exaggeration has led to anatomical adaptation that have opened up the acoustic space with this bimodal frequency continua on the timbre and on the fundamental frequency, which can be used for expressing different attributes, motivations, or emotions, and also maybe form and contrast, that could have then been co-opted for speech. And voila, and thank you very much.